They thought Barron Trump was just another privileged kid with a famous last name. Then, in a stunning courtroom face-off, he dismantled an entire legal argument piece by piece, leaving everyone speechless. Welcome to Real Life Heroes, where we bring you stories that defy expectations. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below to show your support and ensure you never miss an incredible tale like this one. The downtown courthouse in Seattle, Washington, was packed that day. Rows of legal experts, journalists, and curious onlookers filled every seat, anticipating what most believed would be a mere formality. Cameras flashed, pens scratched against notepads, and a hushed buzz hovered in the air. Everyone assumed they were about to witness a brief, uneventful hearing. At the heart of it all sat Judge Henry Parks, a man renowned for his sharp wit and an almost legendary impatience for theatrics. Over the years, Judge Parks had earned a reputation for his no-nonsense rulings and a staunch skepticism toward high-profile figures who believed they could bend the law. Today, he had Barron Trump standing before him, just 18, in a suit so perfectly tailored it seemed almost too immaculate, like a costume meant for a stage. Judge Parks leaned back in his chair, tapping his gavel slowly against the desk. His keen eyes examined the young man across from him, who stood with an air of calm confidence. "Mr. Trump," the judge began, his tone touched with wry amusement, "this is a first for me, an 18-year-old expecting to argue a case. I understand your last name can open a lot of doors, but this courtroom isn't one of them." A low ripple of laughter spread across the spectators. Even a few attorneys exchanged smirks, as though they all shared the same private joke. Barron Trump was out of his depth. Yet Barron didn't waver. His hands remained neatly clasped in front of him. He made no nervous glances at the team seated behind him. Instead, he kept his gaze straight on the judge. Judge Parks raised an eyebrow. "Nothing to say? No big speech? I expected at least a half-hearted attempt to prove why you belong here." More subdued laughter flickered through the crowd, and someone even muttered, "He's out of his league." Finally, Barron spoke, his voice measured and calm. "I wasn't aware the purpose of this court was entertainment, Your Honor." The laughter died off abruptly. A few heads turned in surprise. The slightest flicker of the judge's smirk vanished. Barron's statement had cut through the mockery like a knife. "Well," Judge Parks said, flipping through the case file in front of him, "let us see if you can back up that confidence with substance rather than just a famous surname." A change swept over the room. This was no longer a casual dismissal of an inexperienced teen. The crowd might still have expected Barron to stumble on technicalities or legal jargon, but there was now a hint of curiosity in the air. Even Judge Parks seemed intrigued, though he was far from convinced. Adjusting his glasses again, he offered a dismissive wave. "All right, then. Let us hear what you've got." No one was prepared for what happened next. Barron stepped forward, placing a meticulously organized set of documents on the podium. He opened a brief as though he had done it countless times before. Judge Parks watched, probably expecting stammering or confusion, some sign that Barron Trump was just a kid wearing an expensive suit. But Barron adjusted the microphone and spoke with clear authority. "Your Honor, before we proceed, I'd like to address a few legal misinterpretations that have already appeared in this case." The crowd, which had been humming with whispers and the scribbling of pens, fell quiet. The opposing counsel has repeatedly cited Weston versus Chandler as a precedent to dismiss crucial testimony. However, that ruling hinged on evidence obtained under unconstitutional search conditions, which don't apply here. It's irrelevant. A ripple of movement passed through the opposing side of the courtroom. Their lead attorney, a seasoned litigator in his 50s named Harold Vernon, shifted in his seat, hurriedly scanning his notes. Judge Parks's eyebrow rose. "Is that so?" Barron nodded, flipping to the next page in his file. "Indeed, Your Honor. If the discussion is about admissibility, then Bradford versus Milton would be the more applicable precedent here, as it directly addresses witness credibility under conditions of indirect coercion. That's far more relevant to the current issue. Suddenly, the attorneys in the back rows began to exchange glances. This was no bluff. Barron Trump wasn't just rattling off legal phrases, he was applying them with precision. Judge Parks leaned in a bit, his smirk giving way to genuine interest. On the other side of the aisle, Attorney Vernon refused to let an 18-year-old dictate the conversation. He stood, straightening his tie. Your Honor, with all due respect, this isn't a law school seminar. The argument stands that. But Barron cut him off smoothly. If you're dismissing a precedent simply because it's inconvenient, that suggests a weak case, not mine. The courtroom fell into a stunned hush. Attorney Vernon paused, his eyes narrowing. He looked over to Judge Parks for help, but found none. The judge addressed the attorney directly. Counselor, would you like to respond? A tense second passed, then Vernon offered, through barely hidden frustration. I'll address it in my argument, Your Honor. It was clearly a retreat. Everyone recognized it, and Barron Trump simply adjusted his documents, waiting. Judge Parks tapped his pen on his desk. His tone no longer carried the condescension it had at the start. Continue, Mr. Trump. Barron stood at the podium, unwavering. He showed no sign of arrogance, just a calm sense of purpose. The usual swagger Judge Parks had seen in high-profile litigators wasn't there. Barron just maintained a steady flow of logic, as though he had rehearsed nothing but absorbed everything. Attorney Vernon inhaled, determined to regain the advantage. Your Honor, while Mr. Trump's reference to Bradford versus Milton is, let us say, noteworthy, it still has no bearing here because that case focused on testimonial coercion, not the chain of evidence. Barron didn't skip a beat. In that case, Counselor, you are mistaken. The ruling in Bradford versus Milton didn't just address coercion. It reinforced that witness statements remain admissible if the underlying conditions of influence are not present, precisely why our witness's testimony is still protected. Judge Parks's eyes flicked to the opposing attorney, silently asking for a counterargument. None came. A nervous stirring ran through the audience. Reporters who expected a fleeting cameo from Barron Trump were now leaning forward, laptops perched on knees, typing furiously. Barron pressed on. Dismissing testimony because it's inconvenient is not only legally incorrect, it sets a perilous precedent, one where technicalities overshadow the essence of justice. Another moment of silence fell over the room. Judge Parks inhaled, then exhaled a short breath that was somewhere between a sigh and a soft laugh. He turned his attention back to Barron. Well, Mr. Trump, I'll admit I wasn't expecting this. Around them, some attorneys exchanged telling looks. What had begun as a presumed lecture for a privileged teen was turning into a legal demonstration few would forget. The opposing attorney tried again, his voice taut with tension. We're getting sidetracked with unnecessary detail. Barron tilted his head with calm composure. If the law is inconvenient for your case, that's not my problem. Someone in the gallery let out a short chuckle, quickly muffled. Attorney Vernon's jaw clenched, his notes no longer offering him any salvation. Judge Parks exhaled heavily. All right, Mr. Trump. Go on. Now the entire room hung on Barron's every word. He'd done more than just hold his own, he had shifted the balance of power within the court. Even the judge, who initially seemed skeptical, was clearly listening with real attention. Judge Parks folded his hands. Mr. Trump, since you appear so ready, tell me, what exactly do you consider the fundamental flaw in the opposition's argument? Barron flipped another page. They're leaning on a misapplication of Poole versus Harrington, he stated plainly. A ripple moved through the attorneys behind Attorney Vernon. That case, Vernon tried to insist, has often been cited to dismiss evidence based on procedural errors. Barron nodded once. Yes, but only when those procedural errors undermine the reliability of the evidence itself. That's not the situation here. The standard isn't met. If the court entertains such a broad reading, we open a loophole where minor technicalities overshadow substantive justice. Judge Parks paused, absorbing Barron's words. He presided over countless cases featuring experienced lawyers trying to dazzle him. This felt different, no fluff, no ego, just direct, unflinching argument. So, Mr. Trump, the judge asked, leaning forward, what do you think the court should do next under your interpretation? The entire courtroom grew silent, as though holding a collective breath. Barron didn't hesitate. Rule to admit the testimony. Anything else would deviate from established legal framework. Judge Parks' gaze stayed on Barron for a long moment. Across the aisle, Attorney Vernon rifled through his papers, but the damage was already done. If he responded now, it might only make him look weaker. The judge turned to him with a measured expression. Counselor, any further comments? Tension hung in the air. Vernon's face was taut with frustration. Then, in a tone that signaled inevitable defeat, he answered. No further objections, Your Honor. A soft murmur of disbelief wove through the gallery. Barron Trump, the teenager so many had dismissed, had methodically stripped away the foundations of a seasoned legal team's argument. Judge Parks lifted his gavel, striking it lightly. In that case, the testimony is admissible. Gasps flitted through the crowd. Reporters whispered, unbelievable. Barron breathed out quietly, though he showed no sign of surprise. Judge Parks fixed him with a contemplative gaze, his earlier doubt replaced by something akin to respect. Yet the judge wasn't quite finished. The room hushed again as Judge Parks placed down his pen and looked directly at Barron. Mr. Trump, he said, his voice calm, I'll admit that I judged you prematurely. I've sat on this bench for quite a while now. I've seen plenty of people who think they can outsmart the system with bluff and swagger. Most fail. A few audience members shifted in their seats, eager to hear the judge's final words. You, on the other hand, didn't rely on theatrics. You gave me concise, accurate legal points. So tell me, Barron, how long have you been studying law? Barron answered without hesitating. For years, Your Honor. Judge Parks tilted his head. Yet you're not in law school. Barron's voice was soft, but resolute. Not yet. A sharp exhale escaped Judge Parks, like a short laugh without the levity. Well, if half the attorneys in my courtroom prepared like you do, my job would be a lot smoother. Attorney Vernon sat stiffly, arms crossed, painfully aware that any protest would be futile. Judge Parks straightened up and replaced his glasses. The testimony remains admissible. That's final. Then he directed one final comment at Barron Trump. Consider this your unofficial first law school exam, Mr. Trump. You passed. One final crack of the gavel ended the session. Barron packed up his papers, offered the judge a respectful nod, and exited the courtroom. Every eye followed him. He entered that courthouse as just another son of a famous family, but he left as a force to be reckoned with, someone who had not only defended his position but redefined everyone's assumptions. The lesson was unmistakable: never underestimate a person simply because of your own preconceived notions. Intelligence, thorough preparation, and resilience can shatter those assumptions in an instant. Ultimately, true power doesn't stem from where you come from, it arises from what you know and how you wield that knowledge. If you appreciated this extraordinary story, remember to like, subscribe, and comment here on Real Life Heroes for more compelling tales just like this. There's always more to discover, and you won't want to miss what comes next. Stories 2. She was his favorite teacher until she vanished without a trace. Years later, during one of the most historic events in recent memory, Barron Trump locked eyes with a familiar stranger in the crowd. What happened next would shatter his innocence and mend a broken past in ways no one could have imagined. Welcome to Real Life Heroes, where we share the most stirring true stories of everyday courage and compassion. If this story moves you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below. Your support helps us bring more real-life inspiration to the world. The winter morning in New York City was cold and biting, the chill seeping through layers of finely woven wool and cashmere. Instead of the usual hustle of Wall Street or the trendy cafes of Soho, the city had gathered for an event of monumental significance, an inauguration held at a sprawling urban park that served as an unlikely stage for history. Skyscrapers loomed in the distance as the crowd, a vivid tapestry of red, white, and blue, pulsed with patriotic fervor. Cameras flashed incessantly, and supporters cheered with an intensity that electrified the frigid air. At the center of this historic gathering, Barron Trump stood silently beside his father. Despite the weight of the moment, his stance was composed, his posture dignified as if rehearsed countless times before. His small hands were securely buried in the pockets of his long, dark overcoat, a precaution against the biting cold and the constant scrutiny of the cameras. At only 10 years old, Barron was no stranger to the relentless gaze of the public and the barrage of whispered commentary that accompanied his every appearance. Yet today, nothing about that mattered. Today, something, or rather someone else, demanded his attention. Amid the roaring crowd and the cacophony of patriotic music, Barron's eyes scanned the sea of faces. His gaze wandered over the rhythmic swaying of banners and the distant glow of smartphones, capturing every moment. Then, as if time had slowed to a crawl, his eyes locked onto a figure a few rows back. There, among the throng of fervent supporters, stood a woman distinctly apart from the others. Wrapped in a heavy, well-worn scarf that contrasted with the modern accessories of the crowd, she was not holding any sign, nor was she absorbed in the frenzy of applause. Instead, she stood quietly, her eyes fixed with a purpose that seemed to pierce the veil of the crowd. For just an instant, the roar of the crowd and the grandeur of the occasion faded into insignificance, and Barron found himself transported back to a simpler, more innocent time. He recognized her instantly. Though years had passed, those kind eyes and the gentle warmth in her expression were etched indelibly in his memory. She had once been a constant presence in his everyday life, a beacon of kindness and wisdom in a world that too often demanded conformity from him. In his young mind, she was more than just an educator, she was a guiding light, someone who had seen beyond the surface and treated him as an individual rather than merely the son of a billionaire. Back then, in a modest classroom far removed from the glare of the public eye, she had been known as Ms. Carter. In that single, heart-stopping moment, the noise of the inauguration, the resounding speeches, the clapping of thousands, the flash of cameras dissolved into a quiet hum. Barron was no longer the son of a prominent figure standing amid the historical pomp of New York City. He was simply a child, lost in the flood of memories that carried him back to those early school days when learning was an escape from the burdens of expectation. In that classroom, where imagination reigned and every lesson was a journey, Miss Carter had not seen him as merely a symbol of privilege. Instead, she had seen the curious, observant boy with a mind full of questions and dreams yet to be defined. But as he watched her now, standing in the chill of that monumental day, he saw that time had not been kind. Miss Carter looked older, the spark in her eyes tempered by fatigue and sorrow. The scarf she wore was drawn tightly around her face, concealing some of the gentle lines that once radiated hope. Yet, even through the veil of hardship, Barron could still see the soft encouragement that had always been her trademark, a quiet testament to a life dedicated to nurturing minds rather than chasing fame. A surge of emotion coursed through Barron's heart, a mingling of pain, regret, and longing. How could someone who had once made the classroom a sanctuary simply vanish from his life? The last time he remembered her, Ms. Carter had been a vibrant presence, leading a lively art project in which laughter and learning flowed as freely as the paint that stained her hands. Then, as abruptly as a winter storm, she had disappeared. When he had inquired about her, the adults in his world offered only vague explanations: budget cuts, administrative reshuffles, decisions made by faceless boards. But to a young mind, the idea that a beloved teacher could simply vanish made no sense. Teachers, he had thought, were meant to be constants, not figures to be replaced by substitutes with rehearsed smiles and hollow reassurances. That fateful day at the park, as Baroness' eyes remained locked on the figure of Miss Carter, his mind spiraled into a whirlwind of memories and unanswered questions. The gentle cadence of his father's speech, the echo of patriotic songs, and the applause of thousands, all of these details receded into a distant background as he wrestled with the realization that the woman before him was more than a memory. She was real. And she had returned, perhaps by fate or chance, to reintroduce him to a past that he had long tried to forget. Unable to tear his eyes away, Baroness' fingers dug into the fabric of his coat, grounding him in the present while his heart raced in a realm of recollections. The bustling sounds of the inauguration, once a symbol of national pride, now only served as a reminder of what had been lost. The once comforting routine of school days had been replaced by the overwhelming responsibilities of being in the public eye. Yet here, in the midst of a historic celebration, his heart ached with a mix of hope and sorrow, hope that maybe, just maybe, he could reconnect with the teacher who had once believed in him, and sorrow for the years lost to silence and misunderstanding. Later that same night, after the event had drawn to a close and the city's celebrations had quieted into an uneasy lull, Barron found himself in the solitude of his room at Trump Tower. The flickering streetlights outside his window offered little comfort as he lay awake, his mind repeatedly returning to the mysterious woman he had seen in the crowd. Was it truly her? Could the woman who had once lit up his classroom now be living a life of hardship and obscurity? The questions tormented him, each one a reminder of the unresolved pain of the past. Determined to find answers, Barron resolved to act. The next morning, fueled by a mix of youthful resolve and the legacy of his family name, he discreetly inquired with the security personnel about the identity of a mysterious attendee from the event. Although the official channels were not designed to track down random individuals, Baron's persistent inquiries eventually led to a breakthrough. It turned out that Ms. Carter was now residing in Chicago, far from the glamorous corridors of power and privilege, in a modest one-bedroom apartment above a run-down laundromat. The news unsettled him deeply. How could someone who had once embodied the promise of a nurturing future be reduced to such quiet desperation? Ms. Carter, whose passion for teaching had illuminated the lives of countless students, now struggled to make ends meet. There were no signs of a secure career, no supportive family to lean on, just the harsh reality of a system that had failed to protect its most dedicated servants. Without a second thought, Barron reached for his phone and, with trembling resolve, dialed her number, a call he had rehearsed in his mind for days. The phone rang twice before a soft, tentative voice answered. Hello. For a heartbeat, time seemed to stand still. Barron could hardly believe the sound he was hearing, a voice that, despite the years and the hardship, still carried the warmth of familiarity. Miss Carter? He managed to ask, his voice barely above a whisper. A long pause followed on the other end of the line, thick with memories and unspoken emotions. Who is this? Came the cautious reply. It's Barron, he said simply, letting the name hang in the air. There was another silence, a pregnant pause filled with disbelief and cautious hope. Barron Trump? She finally asked, her tone softening as recognition dawned. Is it really you? Yeah, he replied, his voice steady now despite the undercurrent of emotion. I saw you at the inauguration. I had to know if it was really you. That simple exchange bridged the gap of years and distance. Ms. Carter's initial reserve slowly gave way to a hesitant smile, as if the sound of his voice had stirred something long dormant within her. After several moments of unspoken understanding, she invited him to meet in person. They agreed to meet in a small, quiet cafe in Chicago, a place far removed from the dazzling lights and pomp of New York City, where the everyday rhythm of life could reclaim its gentle pace. The day of their meeting arrived with a muted promise of change. The cafe was tucked away on a quiet side street, its modest decor and soft ambient music creating an atmosphere of privacy and intimacy. Barron entered, his heart pounding with anticipation, and soon spotted Ms. Carter sitting by a window. The years had etched their story on her face. Her eyes, once filled with boundless hope, now held the quiet sorrow of someone who had weathered too many storms. Yet, even in that weariness, there was a spark of determination, a glimmer of the passion that had once ignited every lesson in her classroom. They exchanged greetings with a mixture of formality and tenderness. "You've grown so much," Ms. Carter remarked, a small, bittersweet smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I remember you as the quiet boy who always had your nose in a book, always analyzing every detail." Barron chuckled softly. "I used to say I'd be taller than my dad one day," he recalled, the memory bringing a rare lightness to the moment. "But more than that, you taught me to see the world differently. You made me understand that sometimes, the quietest voices have the most to say." The conversation gradually deepened, moving from the nostalgic echoes of classroom memories to the harsher realities of the present. Ms. Carter's eyes grew distant as she recounted the events that had led her away from teaching. "I never meant to leave," she confessed, her voice barely audible over the soft clink of coffee cups and murmurs of other patrons. "I was fired that day. Not because you did anything wrong, Barron, but because I did something right. I stood up for you, stood up against a system that had already decided you were too important to be questioned. I confronted a teacher who made an offhand remark about your future, as if your success was guaranteed by your name. In doing so, I became an inconvenience. And in a place where appearances mattered more than truth, inconvenient teachers are simply erased." The weight of her words fell over Barron like a tidal wave. For years, he had thought her disappearance was a quiet mystery, something that could be forgotten as he grew older. But now he understood the full measure of her sacrifice, the courage it took to challenge a system, and the personal cost that came with it. "I'm so sorry," he murmured, reaching out as if to bridge the distance between their worlds. "I wish I had known, so I could have helped you then." Ms. Carter shook her head gently, her gaze steady but filled with an unspoken pain. "You were just a child, Barron," she said softly. "You shouldn't have had to carry that burden. I thought I was protecting you, sparing you the harsh realities of a world that doesn't always reward truth. But now that you're here, now that you're asking, I realize I can't hide anymore." In that quiet moment, the cafe's ambient sound seemed to fade into the background as the two shared their truths. The conversation meandered through years of longing and regret, stories of missed opportunities, of silent sacrifices made in the name of integrity, and of dreams deferred by forces far beyond their control. Barron listened intently, absorbing every word, every inflection of her voice, which carried both the warmth of remembered kindness and the chill of hard-won wisdom. As the afternoon wore on, the inevitable question hung in the air, one that had tormented Barron for years. "Why did you never reach out?" he asked quietly, his eyes searching hers for answers that might mend the gaps of the past. Ms. Carter sighed, her expression a blend of sorrow and acceptance. "Life doesn't work that way, Barron," she replied, choosing her words with care. "We move on, we survive, and sometimes, we must let go of the things we cannot change. I never wanted you to be burdened by my struggles. I thought that if I stayed away, you could live your life free of the weight of my mistakes." Her words, though gentle, stung with the truth of lost years. But Barron was not about to let this be the end of her story. With a newfound resolve, he declared, "This time, it's not going to be like before. I'm not going to let you disappear into the shadows of a forgotten past. You changed my life, Ms. Carter, you changed all of our lives, and it's time we rewrite this story." A week later, in a surprising turn of events that reaffirmed the power of human connection, Ms. Carter received an unexpected call. A representative from one of the most prestigious private schools in Boston reached out with an offer that seemed too good to be true: a full-time teaching position, complete with benefits and a salary that far exceeded what she had ever earned before. The school had been so impressed by her reputation and, as it turned out, by a personal recommendation that arrived without any formal request. In parallel, Barron had quietly set up a fund in her name, a fund large enough to cover the mounting medical bills for her ailing father and to secure her future so that she would never have to live in uncertainty again. When Ms. Carter finally accepted the offer, her voice trembled as she called Barron to share the news. "I almost couldn't believe it," she admitted, her tone a mixture of disbelief and cautious optimism. "They said I didn't even need to interview. They knew, somehow, who I was. But more than that, you made it possible." Barron's response was as quiet as it was firm. "You once told me that you don't have to be loud to be heard," he reminded her. "You always said that the right words, spoken at the right time, can change everything. Now, it's my turn to repay that kindness." In that moment, as Miss Carter allowed herself to believe that perhaps the future could hold more promise than the past, a spark of hope lit within her. She had always been the quiet force behind countless successes, the mentor who had silently reshaped destinies. And now, through the unyielding determination of a young man who refused to let injustice stand, her life was about to be transformed once again. As the days turned into weeks and the seasons began to shift, the impact of their encounter rippled far beyond the confines of their personal story. In communities across the nation, whispers of their meeting began to circulate, a tale of a boy who defied expectations and a teacher whose sacrifice would not be forgotten. Parents began to speak of the importance of standing up for what is right, of nurturing the quiet brilliance in every child, and of the profound, sometimes painful, impact that a single act of kindness can have on a life.